The sun rose lazily over the horizon of Pleasant Retreat Farm, illuminating the vast lands that stretched across rural Montana. Lucy Miller had been up for almost an hour, as always. Her brown eyes, once bright, now carried the weight of years, of disappointment. At 35, her face still retained traces of the beauty that had enchanted Carl Miller 10 years ago, when he had promised to give her the world. "Stubborn, where are you?" she called softly, while placing some corn in the trough near the small stable. The black goat appeared like a shadow, approaching cautiously. There was something almost human in the way he looked at Lucy, as if he understood each suppressed sigh, each swallowed tear. "Only you understand me here, don't you?" she whispered, stroking the animal's fur. The creaking of the house door interrupted the brief moment of peace. Carl appeared on the porch, his hair disheveled and his gaze clouded, the result of the previous night's drinking. Lucy straightened up quickly, as if she had been caught in some infraction. "Is the coffee ready?" he bellowed, not bothering to greet her. "Yes, Carl. I'm going to prepare it now." The kitchen, though simple, was the only space where Lucy still managed to feel minimally safe. The walls, yellowed by time, silently witnessed her routine of suffering. As the water boiled, she observed through the window the landscape that extended beyond the property's fences. In the distance, the dense brush hid mysteries and, perhaps, possibilities. "Are you going to stand there daydreaming all day?" Carl's voice interrupted her thoughts. "There's a ton of work to do on this farm, and you're standing there like a statue." Lucy served the coffee in silence, avoiding any eye contact that might provoke more insults. Carl, in turn, drank noisily, making sure to make clear his disgust with the taste. "This tastes like pig slop. You can't even do this right." His words were like whiplashes, but Lucy had developed an invisible protection. In her mind, she wasn't there. She was somewhere else, perhaps riding across the field, feeling the wind in her hair, free like that wild horse she occasionally spotted on the property. "I'm going into town today," announced Carl, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "And you know the drill, right? I don't want anyone coming in here while I'm gone." "Yes, Carl." When her husband finally left, taking the old pickup truck down the dirt road, Lucy allowed herself to breathe deeply. It was in these moments of absence that she truly existed. Quickly finishing her household chores, she decided to walk to the edge of the property where the brush began to get denser. That's when she heard it, the distant, melancholy whinny that always caused a shiver down her spine. She looked to the horizon, and there it was, the majestic wild horse, its brown coat gleaming under the morning sun. For some inexplicable reason, the animal always seemed to appear in the moments when she most needed a sign, a presence that reminded her that there was life beyond those fences. "Look, there he is again," she murmured to Stubborn, who had followed her there. "So free, so different from me." The horse remained motionless for a few moments, as if it were really observing her, understanding her situation. Then, with a quick and elegant movement, it disappeared among the trees. Lucy sat on the grass, feeling the sun on her face. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to ride that horse, crossing the fields without looking back, leaving behind Pleasant Retreat Farm and all the painful memories it held. "One day, perhaps," she whispered to herself, knowing it was just a distant dream. But that morning something had changed. When she opened her eyes again, she saw a figure approaching on the dirt road. A woman with an urban appearance, carrying a folder, walked determinedly toward the house. Lucy stood up quickly, feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Visitors were rare at Pleasant Retreat, and Carl did not like strangers on his property. "Good morning," called the woman, smiling as she spotted Lucy. "You must be Mrs. Miller, right? My name is Rachel Sanders. I'm from the County Social Assistance Department." That unexpected encounter was about to change everything in Lucy Miller's life. And in the distance, like a vigilant presence, the wild horse watched, as if it knew exactly what was coming. Rachel Sanders was accustomed to visiting remote homes in her role as a social worker, but there was something about Pleasant Retreat Farm that disturbed her from the moment she set foot on the property. Perhaps it was the oppressive silence, broken only by the wind in the leaves of the trees. Or perhaps it was the frightened look of Lucy Miller, who seemed simultaneously relieved and apprehensive about her presence. "Would you like some coffee?" offered Lucy, leading the visitor to the house. Her hands trembled slightly as she served the drink, spilling a few drops on the worn wooden table. "I'm making visits to the more remote rural properties," explained Rachel, discreetly observing the poorly disguised bruises on Lucy's arms. "Our program seeks to offer support and information about services available in town." Lucy nodded, keeping her eyes lowered. There was a caution in her behavior, as if each word could be a trap. "My husband isn't home right now," she commented nervously, looking toward the road. "He doesn't like visitors much." Rachel smiled understandingly, removing some leaflets from her folder. "This is a new project from the county. We're implementing a support center for women in town," she explained, highlighting one of the pamphlets. "We offer legal guidance, psychological support, and, when necessary, temporary shelter." Lucy's eyes fixed on the words "temporary shelter," and an almost imperceptible gleam appeared in her gaze. For a brief instant, Rachel saw hope in those tired eyes. "It must be important work," Lucy responded vaguely. "It is. Many women don't know they have options, especially those who live isolated like you." The comment, though casual, made Lucy stiffen. It was as if Rachel had touched an open wound, exposing a truth that she tried to deny to herself. At that moment, a noise in the yard caught the attention of both women. Lucy's black goat, Stubborn, was on the porch, observing them with his curious yellow eyes. "This is Stubborn," Lucy introduced, with a genuine smile for the first time. "He was a gift from my father, before he passed away." Rachel noticed the change in Lucy's tone of voice when talking about the animal. It was evident that the goat represented more than simple companionship. It was a connection to a less painful past. "He seems very attached to you," commented the social worker. "He's my only friend here," responded Lucy, immediately regretting her sincerity. "I mean, besides Carl, of course." The conversation was interrupted by a distant whinny. Lucy's eyes immediately turned to the window, and Rachel couldn't help but notice the fascination in the woman's gaze. "It's the wild horse," explained Lucy, almost in a whisper. "He lives around here in the brush area. Nobody has managed to tame him." "It's rare to see wild horses in this region," commented Rachel, intrigued. "He's special," replied Lucy, with an almost reverent tone. "Sometimes I think he understands. Me, it seems like—" She hesitated, as if afraid of sounding crazy. "It seems like he always appears when I'm most distressed." Rachel observed the change in Lucy's countenance. There was a deep connection between that woman and the animal she described, something that went beyond rational understanding. "Some animals have incredible sensitivity," agreed Rachel, trying not to alarm Lucy with skepticism. "They pick up on things that we humans often ignore." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Rachel subtly introducing topics such as female independence and individual rights. Lucy absorbed each word like dry earth absorbs water, although she tried to disguise her interest. "Lucy, I want you to know that you're not alone," said Rachel finally, handing her a card with her personal number handwritten on the back. "If you need anything at all, you can call me. Anytime." The sound of a motor in the distance made Lucy pale. She quickly tucked the card into her apron pocket, standing up with a start. "You'd better go now," she said, hastily escorting Rachel out. "Carl doesn't like to find strangers when he returns from town." Rachel understood the urgency in Lucy's tone and nodded, picking up her folder. "Remember, Lucy, you have options," she emphasized, before saying goodbye. As she walked back to her car, strategically parked at some distance from the house, Rachel felt a chill on the back of her neck. She turned and saw in the distance the horse Lucy had mentioned. It was standing at the edge of the brush, imposing and vigilant, as if it were really watching the house. For a moment, Rachel could almost believe in the mystical connection Lucy had described. As Rachel moved away, Lucy remained on the porch with Stubborn by her side. The pamphlet that the social worker had left was hidden in her pocket, along with the card. For the first time in years, a forbidden thought formed in her mind. What if there was a way out? The sound of Carl's pickup truck was approaching, and Lucy quickly went back inside the house, assuming her usual posture of submission. But something had changed that morning. Deep within her being, a seed had been planted, and, at the edge of the forest, the wild horse remained like a silent promise of freedom. Carl's return to the farm was like the harbinger of a storm. Lucy could predict the signs: the unnecessarily forceful slamming of the pickup truck door, the heavy footsteps on the porch, the suspicious look that scoured every corner of the house as if searching for evidence of some betrayal. "Who was here?" he asked, sniffing the air like a predator. "I smell perfume." Lucy felt her heart race. Lying to Carl had never been a safe option, but the truth could be even more dangerous. "A lady from the county," she answered, keeping her hands busy with the bread dough she was preparing. "She was visiting rural properties." Carl's face contorted into an expression of displeasure. He approached his wife, invading her personal space in a way that made her instinctively shrink. "And what did she want?" "Nothing special, just left some papers about county programs," replied Lucy, trying to sound uninterested. Rachel's pamphlet burned in her pocket like a dangerous secret. Carl grunted something unintelligible and headed to the living room, where he threw himself on the old sofa, turning on the television at high volume. Lucy breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew the truce would be temporary. The bottle of whiskey he had brought from town was already half empty, and the more he drank, the more unpredictable he would become. As she finished preparing dinner, Lucy watched the rain that was beginning to fall outside. The heavy drops hit against the windows, creating a liquid curtain that isolated the farm even more from the rest of the world. On days like this, the feeling of loneliness intensified, as if the house were an island in an ocean of hopelessness. Stubborn appeared at the kitchen door, wet and restless. Lucy gave him a warning look. Carl hated seeing the goat inside the house. "Go on, Stubborn, get out of here," she whispered, gently pushing the animal outside. "Go take shelter in the stable." Looking through the rain, Lucy had the impression of seeing a silhouette in the distance near the fence. For a moment, she thought it was the wild horse, but the vision disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the curtain of water. Dinner proceeded in silence, interrupted only by the sound of the rain and occasional acidic comments from Carl about the food. Lucy kept her eyes lowered, avoiding provocations. Her mind, however, was far away. She thought of Rachel's words, of the existence of a place where women like her could find refuge. It was hard to believe that such a possibility could exist for someone as isolated as she was. "What are you thinking about so much?" Carl's voice cut through her reveries like a knife. "You've been different since that woman was here." Lucy swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "It's nothing. I'm just tired," she replied, getting up to collect the plates. "The rain makes me this way." Carl observed her suspiciously, his eyes red from drinking, but he didn't insist. He turned his attention back to the bottle, serving himself another generous glass. Later, when Carl finally fell asleep on the sofa, Lucy allowed herself a moment of privacy in the bedroom. She took the pamphlet and Rachel's card from her pocket, examining them in the dim light of the lamp. The words "temporary shelter" and "psychological support" danced before her eyes, like distant promises. On the back of the card, Rachel's personal number, handwritten, seemed like a secret code to a different world. A thunderclap echoed in the distance, making the house tremble. Lucy quickly tucked the papers under the mattress and approached the window. The rain was now falling furiously, turning the yard into a mud pit. That's when she saw him. The wild horse was there, a few meters from the house, motionless under the storm, like a ghostly apparition. "What are you trying to tell me?" she murmured, pressing her hand against the foggy glass. The animal raised its head, as if it had heard her voice through the storm. Its eyes seemed fixed on hers, transmitting a message that Lucy still couldn't completely decipher. Then, with a sudden movement, the horse turned and dashed toward the brush, disappearing into the darkness. Lucy remained at the window for a few more minutes, feeling a strange mixture of fear and fascination. There was something in that animal's behavior that defied rational explanations. It was as if it were trying to show her something, guide her somewhere. The sound of Carl mumbling in his sleep brought her back to reality. She moved away from the window and lay down on the bed, pulling the thin blanket over her shoulders. As the storm raged outside, another storm was forming inside her, a turbulent mixture of fear, hope, and, for the first time in a long time, determination. That night, Lucy dreamed of the horse. In her dream, she was mounted on the animal, galloping through endless fields, with the wind whipping her face and a sensation of freedom that she had never experienced in real life. When she woke up, with the first rays of sunlight penetrating through the window, something had changed inside her. The seed planted by Rachel was beginning to germinate, nourished by the mysterious presence of the wild horse. She got up before Carl awoke and went to the kitchen. As she passed through the living room, she saw him still asleep on the sofa, snoring loudly, the empty bottle fallen on the floor. Outside, the world seemed washed by the previous night's rain, as if the storm had cleaned not only the landscape, but also something inside her. Upon opening the kitchen door, Lucy found Stubborn patiently waiting, as he did every morning. But today there was something different in his gaze, as if the goat also felt the change that was taking place in his owner. "Good morning, friend," she whispered, caressing the damp fur of the animal. "I think today is going to be a different day." The days following Rachel's visit brought a new dynamic to Pleasant Retreat Farm. Carl seemed more suspicious, observing Lucy's every movement with attentive eyes, as if he could read in her features the thoughts she tried so hard to hide. His drinking now started earlier, and his fits of rage became more frequent and unpredictable. On a particularly tense morning, as Lucy prepared breakfast, Carl appeared in the kitchen with his face still marked by sleep and the sour expression of someone who wakes up with the bitter taste of the previous night's drink in their mouth. "I need to go to Marshall Creek," he announced, referring to the neighboring town, larger than the municipality to which the farm belonged. "The tractor needs parts. I'll be gone all day." Lucy nodded, keeping her eyes fixed on the frying pan where she was frying eggs. Her heart, however, accelerated with the prospect of having an entire day without her husband's oppressive presence. "There's food in the refrigerator. I don't want you leaving the farm," he added, in a tone that didn't admit contestation. "And if anyone shows up, especially that nosy social worker, you tell them we're not receiving visitors." "Yes, Carl," she replied automatically as she served the strong coffee he demanded every morning. After breakfast, Carl left in the old pickup truck, leaving behind a cloud of dust on the dirt road. Lucy watched the vehicle move away until it disappeared on the horizon, feeling that familiar sensation of temporary relief spread through her body. With the house to herself, Lucy quickly completed her domestic tasks and decided to take a walk around the property, something she rarely allowed herself when Carl was nearby. She called Stubborn, who followed her happily, and headed to the small creek that cut across the back of the farm. The day was clear, with a sky of intense blue that seemed to mock the darkness in which she lived. She sat by the creek, watching. The crystalline water ran over the stones, creating a soft and hypnotizing melody. Stubborn grazed peacefully a few meters away. It was then that she felt that familiar presence. She raised her eyes, and there he was, the majestic wild horse, standing on the other bank of the creek, observing her with those deep and intelligent eyes that fascinated her so much. "Hello," she whispered without moving, afraid of scaring him away. The animal tilted its head slightly, as if responding to the greeting. There was a moment of silent communion between the two, a communication that transcended words. Lucy felt a wave of warmth coursing through her body, a sensation she couldn't explain rationally. Suddenly, the horse released a soft whinny and turned, slowly moving away. But instead of disappearing into the brush as it usually did, it stopped after a few meters and looked back, as if it were inviting her to follow. Driven by an irresistible curiosity, Lucy stood up and crossed the creek on the stones with Stubborn at her heels. The horse waited patiently, and when she approached, started walking again, maintaining a safe distance, but always looking back to make sure it was being followed. This strange dance continued for almost half an hour, with the horse guiding Lucy through trails she had never explored, despite living on the farm for so many years. Finally, they arrived at a small clearing, where the remains of an old wooden cabin stood precariously, almost completely taken over by vegetation. "What is this?" Lucy murmured to herself, cautiously approaching the abandoned structure. The horse stopped a few meters away, observing her with that peculiar intensity. Stubborn, in turn, appeared agitated, sniffing the air and emitting those characteristic sounds that indicated nervousness. The cabin was small, with only one room, and clearly had not been used for decades. The roof had collapsed in some parts, and creepers covered the external walls. Lucy pushed aside some plants from the entrance and peered inside. There were few pieces of furniture, an old bed, a table eaten away by time, and, surprisingly, a wooden chest that seemed relatively well preserved. Driven by curiosity, Lucy entered the cabin and approached the chest. It was closed but not locked. Carefully, she lifted the lid, which creaked in protest. Inside, she found several personal items: old women's clothes, some faded photographs, letters yellowed by time, and, wrapped in velvet fabric, a small leather-bound diary. She sat on the dusty floor and opened the diary with reverence. On the first page, in delicate calligraphy, was written, "Diary of Helen Matthews, 1978. Lucy had never heard this name before, but something about it awakened a strange feeling of familiarity. She began to flip through the diary, reading random excerpts. It was the story of a woman who lived in the region, married to a farmer named August. The first pages described a common rural life, with its challenges and joys. But as she advanced in her reading, Lucy discovered a disturbingly familiar pattern. August was a violent man who isolated Helen from the world and subjected her to constant humiliation and aggression. Today, August came home drunk again, read an entry from July 1979, broke more plates and screamed until he lost his voice, threatened to end me if I tried to escape again. Sometimes I think I will never be free, but the horse appeared at the window again. He always comes when August is away, as if he knew, as if he wanted to tell me something." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. The mention of the horse made her heart race. She continued reading, absorbed in Helen's narrative, which could be her own story decades earlier. The last entries in the diary became increasingly desperate. Helen was planning to escape, mentioned a safe place in the city where she could seek help. And on each page the horse was mentioned as a constant presence, a guide, a protector. The last entry, dated October 2nd, 1980, simply said, "Tonight I will follow the horse. He knows the way to freedom. If something happens to me, may this diary be found by someone who can understand. We are not prisoners of our destiny." Lucy closed the diary, feeling hot tears running down her cheeks. It was as if Helen had written, directly to her through time. She looked at the entrance of the cabin, where the wild horse still observed her, motionless and majestic. "You knew her, didn't you?" she whispered, feeling absurdly logical, despite the absurdity of the situation. "You were here before. You tried to help her too." The horse emitted a soft whinny, almost like a confirmation. Lucy tucked the diary in the pocket of her dress and stood up, determined. The encounter with this fragment of the past couldn't be a coincidence. It was a sign, a call to action. Upon leaving the cabin, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small path almost invisible among the vegetation, which seemed to lead in the opposite direction from the farm. The horse was already following this trail, stopping occasionally to look back as if saying, "Come, this is the way." Lucy looked at the sky. The sun was already beginning its descent to the west. Soon Carl would be back, and she needed to be home when that happened. But now she knew that a plan was forming, a possibility that didn't exist before. "Come on, Stubborn," she called the goat, who followed her reluctantly. "We have to go back, but we'll return here, I promise." As she returned to the farm, Lucy felt the weight of the diary in her pocket like a promise, a reminder that other women had faced the same hell as she and sought a way out. What had happened to Helen? Had she found her freedom? The diary didn't. reveal her final fate, but it had planted a seed of courage in Lucy's heart, and the horse, that mysterious being that seemed to transcend time, continued to observe her from afar, like a silent guardian of a secret that was beginning to unravel. Helen. Matthew's diary became Lucy's most precious treasure. In the few hours when she could have privacy, usually when Carl went out to drink at Joe's store a few miles down the road, she immersed herself in the words of that woman who, 40 years earlier, had walked through the same hell that she now traversed. That night, after Carl fell into a deep sleep, drunk as usual, Lucy removed the diary from its hiding place, a small crack in the floor of the closet, and continued her reading by the weak light of a flashlight. One entry in particular caught her attention. I met a woman in town today. She works in a charity institution and offered me help. She said there is a place where I can stay away from August until I decide what to do with my life. But I am so afraid. What if he finds me? What if he makes me fulfill the promise that he won't let me live if I try to leave? Still, I kept the address. The horse seemed more agitated today when I returned home, as if he knew something important had happened. Lucy felt a chill. The coincidences were too many to be ignored. Helen had also found someone willing to help her, just as she had found Rachel. And the horse, the same horse. It was impossible, obviously, but what if it was some sort of recurring presence on that land, something that transcended normal time? The noise of Carl turning on the living room sofa made her quickly hide the diary. She turned off the flashlight and remained motionless in the darkness, her heart beating rapidly as she tried to organize her thoughts. Helen had planned her escape. In the last entries, she mentioned having gathered some essential belongings, money secretly saved over the years, and personal documents. She planned to escape during the night, following the path that the wild horse seemed to indicate whenever it appeared. The next morning, Lucy got up before dawn, as usual. Carl's face still showed signs of drunkenness, his features relaxed in the deep sleep that followed his nights of intoxication. For a moment, watching him sleep, Lucy could almost see the man she had fallen in love with years ago. Before the alcohol, before the bitterness, before his hands became instruments of pain instead of affection. She sighed, pushing away useless nostalgia. That man, if he had ever really existed, had long since disappeared, replaced by the tyrant who now snored on the sofa. In the kitchen, as she prepared coffee, Lucy heard a familiar sound, the distant whinny of the wild horse. She approached the window, and there it was at the edge of the pasture, its silhouette cut against the sky that was beginning to lighten. "What do you want to show me today?" she whispered, as if the animal could hear her across the distance. It was at that moment that she noticed something different. Beside the horse, a human figure seemed to move in the half-light. Lucy squinted, trying to discern who it could be, but the person, if it really was a person and not a trick of the morning light, soon disappeared into the brush, followed by the horse. The rest of the day passed in the usual routine. Carl woke up in a bad mood, complained about the coffee, the weather, the headache, and announced that he was going to town to take care of business at the bank. Lucy nodded in silence, keeping to herself the small flame of hope that was growing in her chest. As soon as Carl's pickup truck disappeared around the bend in the road, Lucy called Stubborn and headed to the old cabin she had discovered. She wanted to examine the place better, understand what had happened to Helen, and perhaps find more clues about the path mentioned in her diary. The cabin seemed even more desolate in the daylight. The creepers had claimed almost the entire structure, and the partially collapsed roof let in beams of light that illuminated the dust suspended in the air. Lucy returned to the chest she had found previously and continued her exploration. At the bottom, under some old clothes, she found a metal box. She opened it carefully and discovered several black and white photographs. The first showed a young woman with dark hair and a melancholy gaze beside a corpulent man with a severe expression. She turned the photo and read the inscription on the back, "Helen and August, 1975. She looked again at Helen's image. There was something strangely familiar in that face, something that deeply disturbed her. She continued examining the photos and found one that made her gasp. Helen beside a black horse, identical to the one that now roamed the farm. "Impossible," she murmured, feeling a chill run down her spine. On the back of the photo, a single word: Guardian. Lucy continued to examine the contents of the box and found a yellowed envelope. Inside there was a letter addressed to "Whoever finds this diary." With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read. "My name is Helen Matthews. If you are reading this, you have probably found my diary and belongings in old Matthias's cabin. This cabin has been my refuge for the last few months, the only place where I can be myself, away from August's watchful eyes. Tomorrow I intend to leave definitively. Rose, the social worker from town, has secured a place for me in a shelter in Portland. She said I can restart my life there, away from August and all the suffering I've experienced on this farm. The black horse I mention in my diary appeared in my life about a year ago. The locals say he has wandered these lands for generations, always free, never tamed. For me, he has become a symbol of everything I wish to be. He seems to understand me, appears in the moments when I most need strength, and always indicates the same path through the brush, an old shortcut that leads directly to the main road, avoiding the farm entrance where August could intercept me. If you are reading this and find yourself in a similar situation to mine, know that there is hope. That there is a path. The Guardian will show you just as he showed me. May God protect you, whoever you are. Helen Matthews, October 2nd, 1980. Lucy let the letter fall into her lap, silent tears running down her face. Helen had planned her escape exactly as she now planned hers. The same desperation, the same hope, the same mysterious guide. "Helen," she whispered to the dusty air of the cabin. "Did you make it?" In response, she heard the familiar whinny of the horse. She quickly got up and ran outside. The animal was there a few meters from the cabin, observing her with those deep and intelligent eyes. And for a brief instant, Lucy thought she saw again that human figure beside him, a dark-haired woman who smiled gently before vanishing like mist in the sun. With her heart beating strongly, Lucy approached the horse, which didn't retreat this time. She extended her trembling hand and for the first time touched its silky mane. The animal tilted its head, as if it appreciated the contact. "Are you the Guardian?" she asked, feeling simultaneously foolish and perfectly lucid. "Did you help?" "Helen? And now you want to help me too?" The horse whinnied softly and began to walk, stopping after a few steps to look back. It was the same behavior as before, the same silent invitation. This time, Lucy didn't hesitate. With the goat stubborn in her wake, she followed the horse along an almost invisible trail that wound through the dense vegetation. After about 20 minutes of walking, the trail unexpectedly opened onto a well-maintained dirt road, not the road that led to the farm entrance, but an alternative route that Lucy had never noticed before. "The shortcut," she murmured, remembering the words from Helen's letter. "The path that leads directly to the main road." The horse stopped in the middle of the road, looking fixedly at the horizon, in the direction of town. Then it turned to Lucy and whinnied, one last time before returning to the brush. Lucy stood there, feeling the wind on her face and a sensation of clarity that she hadn't experienced in years. Helen had found a path to freedom 40 years ago. Now it was her turn. With Stubborn by her side and the mysterious Guardian as a guide, perhaps there was hope after all. But first, she needed to return to the farm before Carl returned. And she needed a concrete plan, not just hope and mystical coincidences. She needed Rachel. The public telephone at Joe's store was the only one in the region that worked with any regularity. Located about 2 miles from Pleasant Retreat Farm, the small store served as a meeting point for the scarce residents of that isolated part of rural Montana. Lucy waited 2 days until she found the perfect opportunity. Carl announced that he was going to the neighboring town for a meeting with other farmers in the region and would only return at night. It was the chance she needed. "I'll take advantage of it to clean the house well today," she said while serving breakfast to her husband. "Maybe I'll go to the creek to wash some heavy blankets." Carl grunted in response, little interested in his wife's domestic plans. He finished his coffee, took the keys to the pickup truck, and left without saying goodbye. As was his custom, As soon as the sound of the engine disappeared in the distance, Lucy put her plan into action. She quickly changed clothes, took the card with Rachel's number that she kept hidden between the pages of an old recipe book, and left the house taking only a small bag where she kept Helen's diary and some change she had secretly saved. "Come on, Stubborn," she called the goat, who followed her faithfully like a dog. "We have a long walk ahead of us." Instead of following the main road, Lucy opted for the shortcut discovered days before, following the indications from Helen's diary. The trail was more visible now, as if it had been recently used. She walked with determination, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement at the prospect of finally taking concrete action to change her situation. She arrived at Joe's store after almost an hour of walking. The place was practically empty at that time of the morning, with only the proprietor arranging some merchandise on the dusty shelves. "Mrs. Miller, what a surprise to see you here," exclaimed Joe, a man in his 70s who knew everyone in the region. "Where's Carl?" "He went to the farmers' meeting in Marshall Creek," she replied, trying to sound casual. "I took advantage of it to stretch my legs and buy some supplies. I was wondering why I didn't see the pickup truck. Did you come on foot?" "Yes, the day is beautiful for a walk." Lucy bought some basic items to avoid raising suspicions and then asked if she could use the telephone. "Of course, feel free," replied Joe, indicating the device fixed to the back wall. "Just remember that long-distance calls are charged at the end of the month." "It's just a local call to the county social services," explained Lucy, already dialing Rachel's number. Her heart was racing as she listened to the dial tone. What if Rachel didn't answer? What if it had been just empty talk, with no real intention of helping her? After the third ring, a female voice answered. "Rachel." "Sanders?" "Rachel, it's Lucy Miller from Pleasant Retreat Farm. You visited me a few weeks ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Lucy feared the call had dropped. Then Rachel's voice returned, now in a lower and more urgent tone. "Lucy, it's good to hear your voice. Is everything okay? Are you safe?" The genuine concern in the social worker's voice made Lucy feel a lump in her throat. "Yes, I'm fine, for now. Carl isn't home today and—" She hesitated, suddenly aware that Joe might be listening. "Rachel, I need your help. About that place you mentioned." "The shelter," Rachel's voice was cautious. "Lucy, are you thinking of—" "Yes," interrupted Lucy, feeling a wave of determination. "I can't stay here any more, not after what I discovered." She briefly explained about Helen's diary, the abandoned cabin, and the coincidences that seemed to guide her to a path of liberation. "That's extraordinary," said Rachel, after listening attentively. "Lucy, the shelter really exists. It's in Portland, as mentioned in the diary. It's a safe place, where women at risk can stay temporarily while they reorganize their lives." "Portland is so far," murmured Lucy, feeling the weight of the distance. "We have a secure transportation system. I can arrange everything for you, but we need to be very careful. When do you plan to leave?" Lucy hesitated. Until that moment, her plan had been more a set of vague desires than a concrete strategy. "I don't know. Maybe the next time Carl goes out to drink. Usually on Fridays he goes to Zach's bar and only returns in the early morning." "That would be in 2 days," calculated Rachel. "I can arrange for a car to pick you up on the main road, near the shortcut you mentioned. But Lucy, you need to be sure once you leave you won't be able to return. Carl will certainly be furious." Rachel's words made Lucy remember the last entry in Helen's diary, where she mentioned her fear of August's reprisals. History repeating itself 40 years later. "I'm sure," she replied firmly. "I can't continue living like this, and I have the Guardian to protect me." "The Guardian?" asked Rachel, confused. "The horse, that's what Helen called him in her diary. He seems to protect women like us." There was a brief silence, and Lucy feared that Rachel would think she was crazy, talking about mystical horses and old diaries. "Lucy, it doesn't matter who or what this Guardian is. What matters is that you found the strength to get out of this situation, and I'm going to help you. Friday at 8 o'clock at night, I'll be waiting with a car on the main road where the shortcut meets it. Bring only the essentials. documents. Some money if you have it, basic clothes. Nothing that might make Carl suspicious before the time. And what about Stubborn? My goat. I can't leave him behind. Carl would hurt him to get revenge on me. Rachel sighed, but her voice remained firm and understanding. We'll bring him too. I know a rural property near the shelter where he can stay temporarily. After settling a few more details, Lucy said goodbye, promising to be at the meeting point at the agreed time. She hung up the phone, feeling simultaneously terrified and exultant. It was really happening. She was going to leave. She was going to be free. As she left the store, thanking Joe, Lucy spotted the wild horse, the Guardian, standing at the edge of the road, as if it were waiting for her. Her heart raced at seeing the majestic animal, which seemed to approve of her decision with an almost human look. You protected Helen, didn't you? She whispered, as she walked toward the animal with Stubborn faithfully following at her side. And now you're helping me too. The horse whinnied softly, as if answering her question. Lucy felt a strange peace spread through her body, despite the uncertainty of the future that awaited her. The next 2 days were an exercise in self-control for Lucy. Every movement from Carl left her on alert, fearing that he might somehow suspect her plans. She continued her usual routine, preparing meals, cleaning the house, tending to the garden, all with a false normality that masked the inner storm consuming her. Secretly, she prepared a small backpack with essential items, her personal documents, some clothes, Helen's diary, and the little money she had managed to save over the years. She hid everything in the stable, among hay bales that Carl rarely checked. On Thursday night, while Carl slept deeply after his usual drinking session, Lucy allowed herself one last visit to Helen's abandoned cabin. She wanted to thank, somehow, that woman who unknowingly had shown her a path to freedom. By moonlight, the cabin seemed even more spectral, like a relic of a past that refused to be forgotten. Lucy entered silently and headed to the chest where she had found the diary. Thank you, Helen, she whispered to the shadows. I hope you found peace, and I hope to find it too. As she left the cabin, she had the impression of seeing again that female figure beside the Guardian. It was no more than a silver silhouette under the moonlight, but Lucy could swear that the woman was smiling, nodding in approval. Tomorrow, Friday, would be the day Lucy Miller would finally leave behind the prison that Pleasant Retreat Farm had become. The day she would follow in Helen's footsteps toward freedom. And the Guardian would be waiting for her, as he had done 40 years before, to show her the way. Friday dawned with a sky heavy with grey clouds, as if nature itself conspired to add drama to that decisive day. Lucy woke up even before the rooster crowed, her body tense with anticipation. She looked at the side of the bed where Carl snored heavily and allowed herself a moment of reflection. There was a time, many years ago, when she truly believed she would be happy with that man. That illusion, however, had dissipated like mist under the relentless sun of reality. With silent movements, she got up and headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Each gesture was calculated not to arouse suspicion. Today, more than ever, she needed to maintain the appearance of normality. Carl woke up in a bad mood, as always. He drank his coffee, complaining about the food, the weather, the poor harvest of the previous year, a litany of lamentations that Lucy already knew by heart. She responded with monosyllables and nods, her thoughts already far from there, on the road where Rachel would wait for her at night. I'm going to Zach's bar. Later, announced Carl as he put on his worn boots. There's a meeting of producers to discuss the price of milk. Of course, replied Lucy, feeling a discreet relief. At least that part of the plan was guaranteed. Do you want me to prepare something for you to take? Carl stared at her with a suspicious look, as if her kindness was something suspect. No need, Zach makes a stew that's better than that slop you call food. Lucy swallowed the insult in silence, remembering that in a few hours she would be free from those daily humiliations. The rest of the day passed slowly, with Lucy divided between her usual tasks and the secret preparations for the escape. She checked the backpack hidden in the stable several times, making sure she hadn't forgotten anything essential. Around 5 in the afternoon, the first drops of rain began to fall, announcing an imminent storm. Lucy looked worriedly at the sky, fearing that the bad weather might complicate her plans. But there was no turning back. This was her opportunity, and she wouldn't back down. Carl left shortly after 6, taking the old pickup truck down the muddy road. He promised to return late after the meeting and the usual card game with friends, which in practice meant he would only return in the early morning, probably drunk. As soon as the vehicle's headlights disappeared around the bend in the road, Lucy went into action. She changed her simple dress for jeans, a long-sleeved blouse and a resistant jacket, clothes she rarely wore, but which would be more practical for the journey ahead. She put on her only boots, worn but comfortable, and tied her hair in a firm bun. She went to the stable to get her backpack and called Stubborn, who seemed to sense the urgency of the moment, following her without making his usual capricious protests. "It's today, friend," she whispered to the goat, caressing his rough fur. "We're going to leave all this behind." The rain had diminished to a fine drizzle when Lucy, with the backpack on her back and Stubborn at her side, left through the back of the property, taking care not to be seen by the rare neighbors who might be passing on the main road. Instead, she headed to the recently discovered trail, the shortcut that Helen had mentioned in her diary. That's when she saw him. The Guardian was standing at the entrance to the trail, his majestic silhouette cut against the cloudy sky of early evening. The horse whinnied softly upon seeing her, as if greeting her. "You knew I would come," murmured Lucy, approaching the animal. "Just as you knew when Helen left." The horse tilted its head, its deep eyes fixed on hers. Then it turned and began to walk along the trail, stopping occasionally to make sure it was being followed. The trail, now partially illuminated by the moon that emerged between the clouds, wound through the dense vegetation. The ground was slippery due to the recent rain, and Lucy walked carefully, trying not to make noise. Stubborn followed her closely, unusually silent, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. After about 20 minutes of walking, the trail began to widen, and Lucy could see in the distance the occasional lights of vehicles passing on the main road. She was almost reaching the meeting point with Rachel. Her heart was beating rapidly, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and, for the first time in a long time, true hope. That's when she heard the sound of a familiar engine, Carl's pickup truck. She froze, paralyzed by sudden terror. It wasn't possible that he had returned so early. The meeting at Zach's bar usually extended until late at night. Unless... A terrible thought crossed her mind. What if Carl had discovered her plans? What if Joe had commented on her visit to the store, about the call she had made? Or worse, what if someone had seen Rachel waiting on the road and informed Carl? The Guardian also heard the sound of the engine and stopped, his ears raised in alert. Lucy crouched behind a bush, pulling Stubborn with her, trying to control her accelerated breathing. The pickup truck passed slowly on the road, its headlights briefly illuminating the entrance to the trail where Lucy was hiding. For a terrifying moment, she thought Carl had stopped, that he would get out of the vehicle and discover her there. But after what seemed like an eternity, the engine accelerated again, and the pickup truck continued on its way. Lucy allowed herself to breathe again, her body trembling with adrenaline. Carl was probably just returning home earlier than expected. Perhaps the meeting had been cancelled, or he had argued with someone at the bar. The reason didn't matter. The essential thing was that he hadn't seen her. But this meant she needed to hurry. Carl would soon discover her absence and, knowing him, would immediately set out in search of her. She had to reach the main road before he returned. The Guardian seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. It quickened its pace, guiding Lucy through the rest of the trail with an almost palpable determination. When they finally reached the main road, the rain had completely ceased, and the moon was emerging between the clouds, illuminating the wet asphalt. Lucy looked at her watch. 8:05. Rachel should be waiting. She looked anxiously in the direction of town, searching for the headlights of an approaching car. There was nothing but the deserted road, bathed in the silver light of the moon. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. What if Rachel had given up? What if the bad weather had prevented her from coming? Or worse, what if the social worker had never really intended to help her, and it was all false promises? 8:15. Lucy felt panic growing in her chest. Time was running out. If Carl discovered her absence and found her there at the side of the road with a backpack on her back, the consequences would be terrible to imagine. It was then that the guardian, who had remained by her side like a silent sentinel, suddenly raised its head and whinnied. Lucy followed its gaze and saw in the distance a pair of headlights slowly approaching. Her first instinct was to hide again, fearing it was Carl returning. But something in the tranquil behavior of the horse made her stay where she was. The vehicle approached, reducing speed as it neared the entrance to the trail. It was a compact car, very different from Carl's pickup truck. The vehicle stopped completely, and to Lucy's immense relief, Rachel got out from the driver's side, looking anxiously around. "Lucy," she called in a low voice, "are you there?" "I'm here," replied Lucy, coming out from her partial hiding place and running toward the social worker, with Stubborn at her heels. Rachel hugged her briefly, her face expressing relief and concern. "Sorry about the delay. The rain flooded part of the road and I had to take a detour. I was beginning to think you had given up." "Never," replied Lucy, with a firmness that surprised even herself. "I'm ready to leave all this behind." "Then let's go quickly," said Rachel, opening the passenger door. "The social services car is only borrowed until tomorrow morning, and we still have a long journey to Portland." Lucy made a move to enter the vehicle, but stopped upon feeling the touch of something on her back. She turned and saw the guardian, its muzzle gently pushing her, as if encouraging her. "Thank you," she whispered, caressing the animal's mane. "For everything." The horse whinnied softly and backed up a few steps, its eyes fixed on hers until the last moment. "Is that?" asked Rachel, observing the animal with an expression of amazement. "Yes, the guardian," confirmed Lucy, helping Stubborn to enter the back seat of the car. "He has been protecting women like us for longer than we can imagine." Rachel nodded without questioning the strangeness of the situation. There was something in Lucy's expression, a mixture of gratitude and reverence, that made it impossible to doubt the importance of that animal in her journey to freedom. As the car accelerated down the dark road, Lucy looked back one last time. The guardian remained motionless, its majestic silhouette cut against the night sky like a vigilant sentinel. And for an instant Lucy was certain she saw beside him the translucent figure of a woman, Helen, waving goodbye, a smile of understanding and solidarity on her ethereal face. The car rounded a curve, and the vision disappeared. Lucy turned to the front, where the road stretched like an invitation to an unknown future but full of possibilities. The tears that silently ran down her face were not of sadness, but of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Behind them at Pleasant Retreat Farm, the lights of the house were turning on. Carl had returned and at this exact moment was discovering his wife's absence. His fury would echo through the empty walls, but Lucy was already too far away to hear it. Both physically and emotionally, she had crossed a border from which there was no return. And so, under the vigilant gaze of the moon, and guided by forces that transcended human understanding, Lucy Miller followed in the footsteps of Helen Matthews toward the freedom that had been denied her for so long. 6 months had passed since that rainy night when Lucy left Pleasant Retreat Farm and her life of submission alongside Carl behind. The world beyond the property's fences had revealed itself to be simultaneously frightening and liberating, a labyrinth of possibilities that she was learning to navigate day by day. Portland had received her with its intimidating grandeur and frantic rhythm, so different from the oppressive quietness of rural Montana. The women's shelter, managed by an NGO in partnership with the county department, had become her first true home in many years, a welcoming space where she found not only physical protection, but also the emotional support necessary to rebuild her identity. In the first few days, Lucy could barely sleep, waking up startled at every noise, fearing that Carl had somehow found her. Rachel, who had become a friend beyond her professional role, visited her regularly, bringing news from back home and assuring her that she was safe. "He's still looking for you," Rachel told her during a visit 2 months after the escape. "But the police are aware of the situation. He can't approach you even if he discovers where you are. The restraining order that Lucy had obtained with the help of the NGO's lawyers was an additional security, a legal shield that complemented the shelter's walls. Gradually, the constant fear that had accompanied her for so many years began to dissipate, giving way to a vigilant caution, but no longer paralyzing. Stubborn had found a new home at the small farm of Ms. Fay, an elderly widow who collaborated with the shelter, offering refuge for the pets of the women they took in. The goat, with his peculiar temperament, had soon won the affection of the old lady, who allowed Lucy to visit him whenever she wanted. "He misses you, but he's adapting well," commented Miss Fay on a Sunday afternoon when Lucy had gone to visit her faithful companion. "There's a female goat here who already has her eye on him." Lucy laughed, caressing Stubborn's black fur, who seemed really happier and healthier than ever. Life continued, even for a stubborn goat from rural Montana. For herself, Lucy was surprised by her capacity for adaptation. Gradually, with the help of programs offered by the shelter, she completed vocational courses and began working part-time in a bakery in the city center. The work was simple but honest, and the salary, though modest, represented the first income she could truly call her own. "You have a talent for confectionery," complimented Mr. Thomas, the bakery owner, tasting one of the cakes Lucy had prepared, following recipes she had learned from her mother. "You should consider specializing in the area." The idea of studying, of improving herself professionally, was something that had never crossed Lucy's mind during the years at the farm. Carl had always discouraged any ambition she manifested, ridiculing her dreams and limiting her horizon to domestic tasks. Now, in contrast, she was encouraged to seek knowledge, develop skills, dream of possibilities. One of the most striking experiences of these 6 months was meeting other women who, like her, had fled from abusive relationships. At the shelter, in group therapy sessions, Lucy discovered that her story, although unique in its details, followed a sadly familiar pattern. Isolation, financial dependence, constant fear. These were elements present in almost all the accounts. "What impresses me is how we managed to normalize the absurd," commented Martha, one of the shelter coordinators, during one of the sessions. "How we accept living in situations that, viewed from outside, are clearly intolerable." Lucy thought of Helen's diary, of the disturbing coincidences between their stories, separated by 4 decades. The cycle of abuse seemed to transcend time, reproducing itself generation after generation. But now, with institutions like the shelter and professionals like Rachel, there was a way out, a support network that offered alternatives to solitary suffering. On a particularly significant afternoon, Lucy decided to share with the group the story of the Guardian, the mysterious wild horse that had guided her to freedom, just as it had done with Helen 40 years earlier. "I know it may seem fantastic," she concluded, after narrating the events of that night of escape, "but I'm convinced that there are forces in the world that we can't completely explain, connections that transcend time and space." To her surprise, instead of the skepticism she expected, she found looks of understanding and acceptance. Several women shared their own inexplicable experiences, presentiments that had saved them, premonitory dreams, impossible coincidences that had led them away from danger. "I think that when we're at the limit of despair, we become more sensitive to these connections," reflected Teresa, a middle-aged lady who had escaped from an abusive marriage after 30 years of suffering. "As if the universe conspired to show us a way out when we can't see it on our own." Helen's diary had become a kind of amulet for Lucy. Whenever she felt insecure or nostalgic, she reread those pages yellowed by time, seeking strength in the words of a woman who had faced the same fears and overcome similar obstacles. It was like having a mentor, a soul sister separated by time but united by shared experience. On a Saturday afternoon, exactly 6 months after her escape, Lucy received a call from Rachel. The social worker rarely called outside her usual visiting days, which immediately raised an alert. "Did something happen?" asked Lucy, feeling her heart accelerate. "Yes, but don't worry, it's not about Carl," Rachel quickly reassured her. "Actually, it's about Helen Matthews." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of that name that had become so significant in her life. What about her? I found her, Lucy. Helen is alive. The news hit Lucy like a punch in the stomach. All. This time, she had presumed that Helen, like her abandoned diary in the cabin, belonged to the past. The idea that the woman whose words had guided her could be alive, breathing the same air she breathed, seemed almost inconceivable. How did you find her? She finally managed to ask, her voice trembling with emotion. It was almost by chance. I'm working on a project with shelters in other cities, sharing experiences and methodologies. During a meeting in River Junction, I mentioned your story and Helen's diary. One of the coordinators there froze when she heard the name and told me she had an elderly resident named Helen Matthews, who had arrived at their shelter in the early 80s, coming from rural Montana. My God, murmured Lucy, feeling tears forming in her eyes. And is it really her? Are you sure? Absolutely. I showed her a photo of the diary you sent me, and she recognized it immediately. Lucy, she wants to meet you. She said it would be like closing a circle that began 40 years ago. 3 days later, Lucy found herself in the garden of a small retirement home on the outskirts of River Junction. Her heart was beating erratically as she waited, sitting on a wooden bench under the generous shade of a maple tree. Rachel was by her side, holding her hand in a gesture of silent support. That's when she saw her, an elderly lady with completely white hair, wearing a simple dress printed with tiny flowers, walking slowly toward her, supported by the arm of a caregiver. Despite her advanced age, Helen Matthews maintained a dignified posture and a lively gaze, which immediately fixed on Lucy with a disconcerting intensity. "So it's you," said the elderly woman, her voice surprisingly firm for her 80-some years. "The young woman who found my diary." Lucy stood up, feeling an indescribable emotion at finally being before the woman whose words had changed her life. "Yes, it's me. Lucy Miller." Helen smiled, a smile that illuminated her wrinkled face with a beauty that transcended age. "The guardian guided you to me, didn't he? Just as he guided me to Rose, the social worker who helped me escape from August." "Yes," confirmed Lucy, surprised by the lucidity and directness of the elderly woman. "The horse, he appeared to me in the most difficult moments, just as he appeared to you." Helen nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "He has been present on those lands for generations. Some say it's the same animal, which would be impossible, of course, but I prefer to believe that he's a protective spirit, something that transcends normal time." The two sat side by side on the bench, while Rachel discreetly moved away to give them privacy. During the next hour they shared their stories, not just the experiences of abuse and escape that united them, but also the journeys of reconstruction that followed. Helen told how, after fleeing from August with the help of Rose, a precursor to Rachel in her role as a social worker, she had found temporary refuge in the River Junction shelter. There she had received psychological and professional support, eventually getting a job as a secretary in a county school. She never married again, but had adopted a girl, also a survivor, of a violent home, who now as an adult was a university professor and visited her regularly with her grandchildren. "Life has these perfect circles, don't you think?" reflected Helen, observing a hummingbird that was feeding on a nearby flower. "I fled from a situation of violence, was welcomed, and was able to welcome another victim of the same violence, and now, 40 years later, my abandoned diary helped. You find your own path to freedom." Lucy nodded, feeling a deep connection with that woman who unknowingly had extended her hand through time to save her. "What happened to August?" she finally asked, curiosity overcoming delicacy. Helen sighed, a light shadowing passing through her clear eyes. "He looked for me for some time, of course, but the authorities were alerted, and he ended up getting into trouble with the police. Because of drinking, he spent a few months in jail for drunk driving and assaulting an officer. When he got out, from what I heard, he moved to Wyoming. Years later, I received news that he had suffered an accident with his tractor. He didn't survive. Lucy nodded in silence. There was no joy in the news, just the realization that a cycle of violence had come to an end. "And the Guardian?" she asked, returning to the topic that intrigued her most. "Did you see him again after you left?" An enigmatic smile appeared on the lips of the elderly woman. "Not with these eyes," she replied, gently touching her wrinkled face, "but in dreams, many times, and in important moments of decision, I always felt his presence in some way, as if he were guiding me, even from a distance." At the end of the afternoon, when the visit was coming to an end, Helen held Lucy's hands between her own, now wrinkled by time but still firm. "I want you to have this," she said, giving her a small package wrapped in fabric. "I found it in old Matthew's cabin the same day I left my diary there. I never knew exactly what it meant, but I always believed it had some special purpose." Lucy carefully opened the package and found a small carved wooden amulet, the figure of a horse in full gallop, with delicate details that perfectly captured the essence of the Guardian. "It's beautiful," she murmured, moved by the gift. "I believe it was carved by some woman who came before me, and perhaps before her, another and another," explained Helen. "Who knows how many women the Guardian has already helped find the path to freedom? We are just links in a very ancient chain, Lucy. And now it's your turn to carry this legacy forward." On the journey back to Portland, Lucy remained silent, absorbing everything she had learned, feeling the gentle weight of the amulet in her pocket. Rachel respected her silence, understanding the depth of the experience she had just lived. When the bus rounded a curve, revealing the familiar landscape of rural Montana, Lucy had a momentary vision. At the edge of the road, silhouetted against the evening sky, was the Guardian. The wild horse raised its head upon seeing her pass as if in salutation, and by its side, almost translucent under the golden light of the setting sun, a female figure smiled and waved. Lucy blinked, and the vision disappeared. But the feeling of peace and connection remained, like an invisible thread that linked her to all the women who had come before her and to all who would come after. A circle of sisterhood that transcended time, guided by a mysterious Guardian who galloped free as the wind through the infinite fields of hope.